That jar of chocolate hazelnut spread sitting in your pantry actually traces its roots back to a military conflict from over 2 centuries ago. What started as a desperate attempt to stretch a ruined, melted recipe eventually grew into a $36 billion global business. The sequence of events started in 1806, when Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte ordered a massive trade embargo across Europe. This blockade stopped foreign supply ships from reaching European ports, entirely cutting off the delivery of raw sugar and cocoa. Without their primary ingredient, local chocolatiers faced an immediate crisis. Their businesses were on the verge of collapse. To stay afloat, desperate bakers started experimenting with local replacements. They began mixing the tiny bit of cocoa they had left with sugar beets and dried fruits to make the chocolate last longer. Napoleon's blockade planted a seed. The idea that a lack of cocoa could be solved by stretching it with whatever was growing nearby. More than a century later, World War II caused another massive disruption in global trade. Across Italy, food was rationed heavily, and cocoa became incredibly rare and expensive. An Italian baker named Pietro Ferrero found himself in the same position as those 19th-century chocolatiers, struggling to find a way to stretch his severely limited cocoa supply. He looked to the hills surrounding his town and found an abundant, cheap ingredient growing right there, scattered across the soil: hazelnuts. By taking those cheap, local nuts and grinding them down into a thick, oily paste, he could mix in just a tiny fraction of cocoa to create a completely convincing chocolate substitute. Pietro took an absolute lack of resources and turned it into an affordable treat that the general public could actually buy during a time of extreme rationing. As the war ended, Ferrero started selling his new hazelnut creation in local grocery stalls to ordinary working-class families. But this original product was completely solid. Buyers had to take a dense block of chocolate hazelnut paste, cut it with a knife, and eat it in thick slices on top of their bread, almost like cheese. While the cheap price made these solid blocks popular with factory workers, the rigid texture made it difficult to use in other recipes. It was a successful local product, but it was far from a universal household staple. That changed during a scorching hot summer in Italy in 1949. The intense heat wave swept through the local warehouses and completely melted Ferrero's inventory of solid chocolate bricks into unsellable puddles. Instead of throwing the ruined product away, people tasted the melted paste. They quickly realized that the smooth, creamy texture was actually much easier to eat and tasted better than the hard slices. Ferrero discovered that as the mixture heated, the solids and oils drifted apart. To keep them perfectly mixed, he added a natural ingredient acting like a microscopic glue. It grabs both the oils and solids, pinning them in place to create one stable, creamy spread. By embracing a massive inventory disaster instead of fighting it, the company shifted consumer habits entirely. People stopped slicing their chocolate and started spreading it. Decades later, in 1962, the Italian government passed a law stating that companies could no longer use misleading names for their products, forcing Ferrero to abandon their original branding. They needed a new identity. In 1964, they combined the English word nut with the Latin suffix for sweet, ella, creating the label we recognize today. Today, the demand for this specific spread is so high that consumers purchase a jar every 2.5 seconds. This graphic shows just how massive that scale really is. To keep up with production, a full 25% of the entire global hazelnut harvest goes exclusively to this one company. The world's most popular chocolate spread is really just a clever wartime survival recipe that a random heat wave helped turn into a global sensation.